Hurricane Milton transformed from a tropical storm on Saturday to a Category 5 hurricane on Monday. It was the second fastest intensifying Atlantic hurricane on record and is now expected to hit Florida as a major hurricane, the second major hurricane to hit Florida in less than a month. Meanwhile, ex-hurricane Kirk slams into Europe, avoids the UK, but leads to colder weather as it clears away across much of the country. And how's it looking into the weekend and next week? Plenty to cover in this week's Met Office Deep Dive, exclusive to the Met Office YouTube channel. If you haven't already done so, please do hit subscribe so you never miss one of these updates. They come out every Tuesday, and they are our regular in-depth look at meteorology in the UK and around the world. There's plenty to talk about around the world at the moment. And eagle-eyed viewers will have noticed that I've swapped sides. We used to present these on that side. That's where the buttons were. We've switched the buttons to put them on this side, and there's a slightly new interface, a slightly new design, which will, currently very much work in progress, but which will, hopefully in the next few weeks and months, allow us to do even more, show you more things, and be even more interactive. And, well, let's just say it's the first time I've been using it in this kind of presentation, so anything could happen. It's worth staying tuned just to see if anything does indeed go wrong. Now, first of all, Hurricane Milton. This shows the satellite imagery from Saturday up to Tuesday morning, and it shows the speed of intensification. Truly powerful system by the time it reached the Yucatan Peninsula on Monday evening. At that point, sustained winds were 180 miles an hour, and the central pressure was 897 millibars. Now, that central pressure made it the fifth strongest Atlantic hurricane on record by pressure. It was also the joint sixth hurricane in the Atlantic on record for wind speed, and is now expected to move northeastwards and weaken slightly, but still hit Florida as a very powerful major hurricane. This is the official track from the National Hurricane Center, and worryingly, it does take Milton into Florida as a Category 3 hurricane. Sustained winds on landfall of 125 miles an hour. It then crosses the Florida Peninsula as a hurricane and leaves the other side, clears the east as a Category 1 hurricane before weakening quickly as it moves into the Atlantic and moves towards Bermuda. But yeah, it's at the moment oscillating between a Category 4, high-end Category 4, low-end Category 5. So it's a very, very powerful hurricane. And it was the above-average sea surface temperatures in the Gulf that led to this very rapid intensification that we saw throughout Monday. 24 hours, it went from Category 1 to Category 5, and that's what made it the fastest intensifying, or the second fastest intensifying hurricane on record in the Atlantic area since second fastest intensifying, got to get my facts right here, second fastest intensifying hurricane on record, the fastest being Hurricane Wilma in 2005. So truly a very, very powerful storm, and not only will the winds be destructive, but there's going to be the risk of widespread flash flooding as a result of the rainfall. This is the expected rainfall from the National Hurricane Center, and it shows areas of 300 to 400 millimeters of rain. They're showing it in inches. That's the scale there, if you can see it. Obviously, the really heavy rain out in the sea there, but still over Florida, 300 to 400 millimeters of rain in just a day or so, leading to widespread flash flooding, river flooding, and so on. And although the winds will weaken slightly, so it will go down from Cat 4, Cat 5 to Cat 3, it's expected to grow in size, and when these hurricanes get larger, the risk of storm surge is greater. They churn up even more water. And we saw that with Hurricane Helene, of course. That hit the Big Bend area of Florida. This area came up from the south, so a slightly different track, but still hit this area with a storm surge of 10, 15 feet, and expecting similar storm surge there For the Tampa Bay area, 10 to 15 feet, that's where the hurricane is expected to move through on Wednesday night, I beg your pardon, early Thursday. So yeah, 10 to 15 feet, really worrying impacts for Florida, and just a second major hurricane to hit Florida in less than a month. So all the official updates, you can get those through the National Hurricane Center. They are the authority on hurricanes in this part of the world. And of course, we'll be monitoring it as well here at the Met Office and we'll be keeping you updated. Now, later, I'll mention how ex-hurricane Milton next week could cause some uncertainty with our own weather. But for now, we've got another ex-hurricane to think about, and that is ex-hurricane Kirk. And what I did last week was I saved the model data from Hurricane Kirk because I thought it showed a really interesting transition from a hurricane to an ex-hurricane, and this is what's playing on the screen at the moment. There are a number of differences from hurricanes to ex-hurricanes, and so I did a video that you can find on the Met Office YouTube channel explaining these differences between tropical cyclones and extratropical cyclones. Extratropical cyclones are those cyclones that occur outside of the tropics. Hurricanes are tropical cyclones, and there are a number of differences in terms of where they get their fuel from and how they are structured. So I went through those in this video that you'll be able to find on the Met Office YouTube channel. But this shows one of the differences really well, and that is the temperature gradient around the storm. Now, in hurricanes, as they form in the tropics, there's little horizontal temperature gradient. It's warm across the whole area. But as hurricanes move into the extratropics or the mid-latitudes, they increasingly develop a temperature gradient. Now, we are familiar with temperature gradient in areas of low pressure ourselves because we call them weather fronts. When you get this steep temperature gradient from one area to another area, two different air masses colliding, we mark the boundary with the weather front. So we are familiar. Virtually all the low pressure systems that we come across in the UK have some kind of weather fronts, cold fronts, warm fronts, occluded fronts. They're always banging on about weather fronts. Hurricanes don't have weather fronts. They don't have that horizontal temperature gradient. But as they move north, they encounter cooler seas. They weaken unless they move over areas where there is a sharp temperature gradient and or a powerful jet stream, and it's those things that can cause additional energy. Those things fuel mid-latitude areas of low pressure. So hurricanes fueled by very warm seas in the tropics. As hurricanes move north, they move over cooler seas and they weaken significantly. But the kinds of lows that we get at our latitude, they're fueled by the jet stream and they're fueled by temperature differences. And what you're going to see is as Kirk moved over cooler seas, it increasingly developed this temperature gradient. And on Monday, it went from officially being a hurricane to an ex-hurricane as it developed a different kind of structure and weather fronts. And it's those weather fronts that are moving into Spain, Portugal and France over the next couple of days. Really, you've got cold air, you've got all this warmth pushed north, and then you've got cold air coming in from the north and west, and that develops a cold front, and you've got the warm front with the higher humidities that are from the tropics, and you get this enhanced temperature difference. So one of the key differences is the temperature gradient across the storm. That's what marks the difference between a hurricane and an ex-hurricane. Another key difference is the spread of the winds. Hurricanes, as you can see, this is the wind gust graphic, and the darkest colour, the strongest wind gusts in the hurricane are focused right next to the eye of the storm. So you get a very small area of very intense hurricane force winds. Now in Milton at the moment, I think it's around 30 miles, or at least it was on Monday night, 30 miles of hurricane force winds surrounding the eye. But it can be a very narrow area surrounding the eye of very intense winds. As hurricanes move north and they transition to the ex-hurricanes, what's more typical of mid-latitude lows is that those winds get more spread out. So you get stronger winds over a larger area. The low pressure system itself expands, but the winds aren't as intense and they're not necessarily focused around the central low pressure. And they're more asymmetrical. So in a hurricane, you've got much greater symmetry around the eye of the storm. Then as those winds spread out, they can be a lot more asymmetrical. Typically, with these mid-latitude lows, you get the strongest winds on the southern flank of the low. And yeah, that's what we're seeing. So how is ex-hurricane going to affect? Let me just get the right graphic here. I told you it would be a learning experience for all of us. How is ex-hurricane Kirk going to affect Europe? Fortunately for the UK, at least, it is taking a southward shifted track. The jet stream is very south shifted at the moment. That is carrying Kirk our way. Now, what I'm going to show you here is the accumulated wind gust. So this is the maximum wind gust as you go through Tuesday into Wednesday and Thursday. So you can see basically the trail of strongest wind gusts as Kirk moves into Iberia and France. There's Kirk, and at the time of recording, just moving north of the Azores, and then if we just move this forward, and you can see the strongest winds moving through during Wednesday, and then weaken considerably as this low pressure system moves into central parts of Europe. Still as a fairly deep low, still with some heavy rain in places, but here's the strongest sway of the wind. So these are the 50, 60, and in some places, so northern parts of Spain, parts of Portugal, 70 mile per hour wind gusts during Wednesday. So yeah, that's the sway, the very strong winds. There was a risk, looking at some of the different tracks from the model output this time last week, there was a risk that those winds would affect southern parts of the UK, but thankfully for the UK, it's France, Spain, Portugal that will bear the brunt of the strongest winds. And that's why Météo France have named this. They've named it Storm Kirk. When these things come across as ex-hurricanes, they typically keep their name. So Météo France have named it as Storm Kirk. No longer a hurricane, of course, but still as a very wet and windy system, and expected to bring some very heavy rainfall in places as well. Now, this is a similar thing I'm going to show you, and it's accumulated rain. So how the rain builds up, basically, during the next few days. And as Kirk arrives during Wednesday, you can see this area, this swathe of heavy rainfall, 50 to 100 millimetres across northern France, and more than that across the south of France, northern Italy as well, over the mountains, of course, parts of Portugal and Spain. So more than 100 millimetres, up to 200 millimetres perhaps over the mountains as Kirk moves through. So the UK has been spared, because of that south-shifted track of Kirk, the very worst of the wet and windy weather. However, the UK won't be completely unaffected by Kirk, because there will be impacts on our own weather. So I want to take you through the jet stream at the moment. It's quite an interesting setup. There's two streaks of the jet stream there at the time of recording. There's one that's south-shifted compared with normal. We've talked a lot about south-shifted jet streams recently, and that's because a climatological position, or a more typical position for the jet stream, is somewhere just to the northwest of Scotland. But frequently we've seen the jet stream much further south than that, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. That's why, at the time of recording, we've got low pressure sitting across the southwest of England, South Wales as well, and some very lively heavy showers moving in around that low. Slow moving, thundery downpours, hail in places during the rest of Tuesday. More details on that in our short-term forecasts, of course. There's no point in me talking too much about that, because by the time a lot of you watch it, it will be all over. But there is a weather warning in force, and so yeah, full details on our YouTube channel for all of that. But that's all caused by this south-shifted jet stream. Then, looking out in the Atlantic, near the Azores, which are there, an even further south-shifted jet stream, and that's what's picking up Kirk and taking it during Tuesday into Wednesday on that track that mostly avoids the UK. But, and here's the important thing, because the jet stream is quite far to the south, As Kirk moves away, it opens the door to Arctic winds, and you can see that temperature plunge through Thursday. So let's turn on the maximum temperatures for Thursday. Thursday's the coldest day widely across the UK. There will be some sunshine out there. Just a few showers across the north and the east of the UK. But you can see how high those temperatures are. 9 to 12 Celsius widely, and feeling even colder when you add in the effect of the wind chill. So let's take a look at the wind chill. Let's go forward to Thursday there. And Thursday afternoon, you can see 6-7 Celsius or so. That's what it's going to feel like. Not only that, but overnight temperatures are going to drop as well. So this shows the minimum temperatures for Edinburgh. That's the minimum temperature trend through the next few days, down to the low single figures. Glasgow, for example, Stornoway. Temperatures are a bit up and down as we head into the weekend. And that's because there's a little bit of a complicating factor emerging. Now, we start off Thursday with those northerly winds. So sunny spells, showers, those showers pushing into the north and the east, as well as northwestern parts of the UK. The showers will be turning wintry over the Scottish mountains, so we can expect some sleet and snow, even down to 300 or 400 metres, but mostly any lying snow will be 500 or 600 metres and above. Still though, some significant snow expected during Thursday and into the start of Friday over, for example, the Cairngorms. So above 500-600 metres, you can expect 5 to 10 centimetres of snow. Really significant for the start of October. At lower levels, of course, it will be rain, perhaps some hail showers. But by Friday, some mild air is on the way, because what happens is this slice of jet stream emerges in the Atlantic and starts to move towards northern parts of the UK. Now in the south it stays relatively chilly on Friday, but further north we've got this slice of less cold air arriving, and by Saturday that's also going to lead to some showery rain across parts of Scotland, for example, perhaps fringing later on into northern parts of England and Northern Ireland. This slice of jet stream, though, is causing a few issues in the computer modelling, some uncertainty. Now, in the Met Office output, it just leads to some showery rain, but there are some computer model simulations that cause this slice of jet stream to spin up a relatively deep area of low pressure and cause more widespread wet and windy weather across northern parts of the UK on Saturday. So that's something that we'll keep a close eye on. Further south, we keep a ridge of higher pressure, although, again, a fly in the ointment is this low pressure, which some computer model simulations push a warm front up into southwestern parts to give some cloud and patchy rain. So, yeah, a few details to iron out for Saturday. There's the chance of showery rain in northern parts of the UK, especially Scotland, and the smaller chance, the lower likelihood of more widespread wind and rain in the north and northwest. Meanwhile, in the south, it's most likely going to be a fine day on Saturday, but there is that chance of a warm front emerging to bring some cloud and patchy rain. By Sunday, no matter what happens with those systems, there's good confidence that a ridge of higher pressure will build across the UK, settling things down. Meanwhile, out in the Atlantic, these areas of low pressure, it gets messy, basically. And this is an increasingly strong jet stream, so we've got 130 to 140 mile per hour wind speeds on that jet stream. Within it, we've got these areas of low pressure, but meanwhile, this is, by this stage, ex-hurricane Milton, weakening considerably as it moves over the cooler waters of the Atlantic. And down here, we've got ex-hurricane Leslie. So Leslie also weakening as it moves north. And those two ex-tropical systems are likely to bump into the jet stream, this powerful jet stream, and just add to the uncertainty for next week's weather, because how they interact with the jet stream and how the jet stream interacts with those will determine how the jet stream affects the UK's weather through next week. Now, there are a lot of model simulations that have low pressure sitting just to the northwest of the UK, to the south of Iceland, and this is the most likely weather pattern for Tuesday. right, next week, so a week's time. The second most likely weather pattern for the same day has that low pressure sitting slightly further south, and rather than southwesterlies, we've got more southerlies for the UK. Still, the wettest and windiest weather to the west of the UK and the northwest, drier to the east, and you can see these plus 0.7, plus 0.8 numbers on the map, indicating that it's going to be warmer than average. But those subtle differences in the two most likely weather patterns, remember these weather patterns are the result of all the different computer model simulations from the European model, the American model, the Met Office model, and those simulations are summarized in those two most likely weather patterns. But when we look at the detail, this is from the operational run of the European model, and it shows something a little bit differently. So this is from the higher res run rather than all the different lower resolution simulations that we see. This shows lower pressure further to the west, much more of a direct southerly wind, and the rain in the west staying away from the UK. So this is the UK here, if you can't see it that clearly in the camera. And this plume of wet weather moving into the southeast because you've got this southerly flow. And in this simulation, we've got higher pressure exerting itself over Scandinavia. Meanwhile, the main run of the American model shows something similar. The rain largely kept to the west of the UK. Again, this is Tuesday of next week. And these continental plumes are more of a southeasterly airflow rather than a southwesterly. So many parts of the UK dry, higher pressure over Scandinavia again, but the chance of some rain moving up from the continent to affect southeastern areas. So these are the kinds of uncertainties we're dealing with. And the reason the weather is uncertain for next week is because of the interaction between those extratropical systems and the jet stream. It's a week away, so we'll have to see how Milton moves through Florida, comes out the other side, moves into the Atlantic, moves over colder waters, interacts with the jet stream. Leslie then joining in as well, and how those very powerful but very small systems interact with the jet stream will determine how amplified the jet stream is. Now, if the jet stream is very amplified, by that I mean it's wriggly, then we end up with this kind of pattern where the rain largely stays out to the west and we get a direct southerly or southeasterly. If the jet stream is a bit flatter, then you get more progression from the Atlantic, so these systems sweep through. So lots of uncertainty for next week, and we'll be covering that, I'm sure, in a much more detail in the 10-day trend tomorrow. That will be done by Alex Deacon. So stay tuned for that. Hopefully you have more insight, and we'll have a clearer idea of how these systems will affect the UK through next week. Although I suspect, given that the tropical systems are the key in determining the amplitude of the jet stream, it might be some days before we have a much more confident idea of what's going to take place through next week. But most likely, unsettled towards the west, higher pressure over Scandinavia, and some sort of slow-moving pattern in the vicinity of the UK. But yeah, like I say, we'll be covering that in much more detail in the 10-day trend tomorrow. I've talked for long enough today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for sticking with the new touchscreen interface. It will take us some time to get to grips with it, I'm sure, but let me know if you've got any comments or feedback about that or anything else you'd like to see in these deep dives. We'll be here once again doing the same thing next Tuesday. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.